Welcome, everybody. Oh my God, this is the first event of the 2021 Spring Rights Literary Festival. For those of you who don't know, Spring Rights is a program of the Community Arts Partnership of Tompkins County, also known as CAP. I am Robin Schwartz, CAP's Program and Grant Director. We have 39 more Spring Rights events continuing through November. I know you all saw the springrights.org website because you had to go there to register. So check out all the events we have. It's really amazing, and it's all thanks to the writers that we have in our county. Some housekeeping. Throughout this event, the audience will stay on mute. Please use the chat for questions and comments anytime during the event. The bathrooms are down the hall. I'd like to thank our wonderful Spring Rights sponsors. That's Ithaca College, Wegmans, M&T Bank, CFCU Community Credit Union, the Odyssey Bookstore on Green Street, and the Ithaca Marriott. We also receive support from New York State Council on the Arts, and Poets and Writers helps us pay our participating writers. Although this festival is free, actually all of our programs are free, we always have to ask for donations for our general fund. So if you feel moved to donate any amount to the awesome Community Arts Partnership, I will put that link into the chat, along with our Community Arts Partnership website. The marvelous Mickey Quinn is also on the call with us. She's acting as my technician. And also she will replace me if I lose internet, which has happened. Mickey is many things, including an event producer. She runs Trampoline, Ithaca's premier monthly competitive storytelling event. And on Thursday, May 13th, one of the Spring Rights events is a trampoline event. So you could check that out. So let's begin. Our first event tonight is the panel, Writing for the Ears. And the same Zoom link is also for the 710 group reading. So thank you for being here. And I will now turn the event over to Aoise Stratford.
All right, just had to unmute myself. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our panel, Writing for the Ears. I'm Aoise, as Robin introduced. Thank you, Robin, for setting this up for us, and Spring Rights for hosting us. And what I thought I'd do is I'm joined by some wonderful people who are also writers for the ears. And so I'm just going to have us go around one by one and just sort of say who we are, and also kind of a little bit about what our relationship to writing for the ears is. Do we teach it? What kinds of things do we write? What do we listen to? That sort of thing. Just a brief introduction. And then we have some sort of panel questions which we've sort of put together and that we're just going to have a discussion about. And we'll leave some time at the end for questions in case there are things in the chat that people want to talk about. So that's basically the map for where we're headed this evening. Nick, can I call on you to start us off with a brief introduction?
Yes, thank you, Aoise, and thanks, Robin and Mickey and everybody for making this event happen. It's really lovely to see your faces or whatever I'm seeing. I'm a professor in the Department of Performing and Media Arts at Cornell University. I teach in theater studies and media studies in the latter field with an emphasis on television. So sound is a big part of my teaching life. But more particularly, I'm here as one of the co-founders of the Cherry Arts and the co-author with my lovely colleague and friend Aoise of Storm Country, the first headphone walking play that we did for the company and the community. And I want to make a plug for the third one that will be happening May 20th to 30th. It's called Trapdoor. It is collaboratively written, but with the lead writing from our wonderful friend and colleague in the English department at Cornell, Larry Van Cleef-Stefanon. It's shaping up to be very interesting and really different from the other two headphone walking plays that we've done. So I hope people will have that experience. Should be warmer and less rainy, we hope, in a couple of weeks' time, and a good way to be outdoors and enjoy art.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually really excited for Trapdoor. So do you know what the dates are, Nick? Do we know when we're going to be doing it?
Actually, information for that event is on the Spring Rights schedule.
Awesome.
So if you go down past May 16th, you'll see it.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. Caroline, can you share who you are with everybody?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline Levine. I am in the English department at Cornell, and I produced for a few years. I produced a podcast at Cornell called "What Makes Us Human," and there were a couple of problems for us or challenges which made me really focus on the question of writing for the ears. One was that we didn't have a big budget and we couldn't do a lot of editing, and so what we wanted is for one person to speak for about 3 minutes in a compelling way. We didn't have time for kind of interview style, podcast, standard kind of podcast excitement. And so we had to figure out how to help people to craft a short essay that would describe their research, reach a broad public, and be able to be taken in through the ears. So that was a challenge. And the only other thing I'd say is I used to give great, huge lectures at a previous job, 250 or 300 students, and I had to learn how to give my lectures in ways that were different from my conventional teaching. And that ended up changing the way that I write my scholarship. So I think writing for the ears has also transformed me as a writer.
Yeah, super interesting. I'd say that the same is true of me. Jeremy, hello.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Braddock. I teach in the Department of Literatures and English at Cornell, and I'm also director of the Media Studies Initiative. And at Cornell in recent years, I've taught a class called Writing on Tape, which is broadly about the culture and politics of audio tape, and especially its uses for literary writing, but also its uses for surveillance. And I also teach a class called Podcast Radio Gramophone, which is about literary technologies of sound, including podcasts and radio and gramophone, begins in the 1930s and goes up to the present day. And one of the things that we have listened to in class has been Storm Country, written by Nick Salvato and Aoise Stratford, and also the Missing Chapter, which was written by Aoise and Katie Marks. And all of these things came about because I'm also writing a book about the Firesign Theater, who were a comedy group from Los Angeles, which if you are of a certain age, you will know extremely well, but if you aren't, you may not. But I would say that they are about as an amazing an example of writing for the ears as anything which has ever happened. I'm happy to talk more about that. But it was in the early stages of that work that I also recorded an episode of a podcast called The Organist, which was sponsored by McSweeney's and KCRW in Santa Monica, which was about listening to Firesign Theater in Vietnam.
Super cool. Yeah, I hope you will talk more about Fireside. That'd be awesome. Last but not least, Katie, my friend.
Hi, I'm Katie Marks, and I teach writing at Ithaca College, particularly the essay and image text courses. I co-wrote the headphone walking play, The Missing Chapter, with Aoise. And I came to this forum actually after hearing Aoise and Nick's Storm Country. And I remember talking to Sam about how I was really excited. Creative nonfiction is my background. How I was really excited about the ideas for potentially bringing nonfiction elements into these place-based forms. So I'm really interested in embodied kinds of experiences with storytelling, like listening and moving through space and things like that. I'm really excited for this panel and so grateful that all of you are here.
Absolutely, same with me. So I'm Aoise Stratford. I teach with Nick in performing and media arts at Cornell. I'm primarily a playwright. That's sort of my stock and trade, I guess. And I've written a little bit of stuff sort of for radio, done a little bit of adaptation of stuff for radio. But really my first foray into really writing consciously, not for an actual sort of live performance theatre, but for recording, was working on Storm Country. But doing that made me conscious of the ways in which I've been writing for the ears in other ways before I actually thought that that's what I was doing. So I think that's kind of interesting too, and I'm sure that will come up as we talk. So I thought that maybe the best thing to do would be to start with sort of a basic question of like what brought us to this work of writing for the ears. We sort of touched on that a little bit in these introductions. but for me, I'll just say that I've kind of always really loved rhythm. I think playwrights in particular are kind of like, some people say that playwriting is much more akin to poetry, for example, than it is to screenwriting, because it's less about the sort of telling the story with the visual image, and it's more about thinking about language. And sometimes I agree with that, sometimes I don't. But I do think that for me as a playwright, I'm really conscious of rhythm. I love rhythm. I love the way that words sound. And so I think it was sort of my background as a playwright who was kind of invested in the way that words come together to make sounds and rhythms and have silences built into them, that made me really excited about the idea when Nick and Sam came to me from the Terry and said, hey, we've got this idea, just wondering, have a drink, would you like to maybe come on board and do this thing with us? And I think it was the excitement of the possibility of doing something that was just sonic that actually really brought me in. So let's kind of like take that and sort of think about that for a moment. What brought you into it? Katie, you said for you it was partly thinking about sort of the relationship between nonfiction and embodied spaces. Was there anything sort of particularly about the way that sound interacts with the sort of embodied space that seemed important to you when you'd been working sort of on the page?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as writers in creative nonfiction, we're often thinking about the sound of words and the experience of the reader. And so the idea of thinking a little bit more about, for someone who's experiencing the work and listening to it, directing them through space, thinking about how the world serves as setting, but then also having that narrator to guide you and the story. That was really an exciting creative challenge. That when, Sam and Nick brought up that idea of working with you, Aisha, on that, it just sounded, everything is about sound tonight. It just sounded like it would be a really cool and interesting experiment. So I generally love experimental and multimedia kinds of work. Things like video essays are another thing that I'm really drawn to. And having never really had a chance to experiment so much with that myself. I mean, as a writer, I've done a number of readings, and in thinking about the experience of a listener, right? Like how much and what kinds of things can a person really take in? It's quite different when you're looking at something on the page versus when you're just listening to something. And so thinking about how that experience might translate, if you're then also thinking about a body in space, moving through space, looking at the world. It was a really exciting kind of thing that drew me to the work.
It's interesting that you say the video essay too, because I think that's really like thinking about the relationship between other media and the written page, right? Like, you know, that's what got you there, even though it wasn't an ear thing, it was an eye thing in some ways. But Nick, for you, it was also kind of like, it was coming from television, right? So partly.
And poetry. I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up. You know, so I should just say as a kind of asterisk or footnote that the Sam that has been invoked a couple of times is Samuel Magellan, who's the co-founder with me of the Cherry Arts and the artistic director of the Cherry Artists Collective. And one of the doggedly practical things that was happening when the company was founded was that we were in the process of building the space at 102 Cherry Street, where lots of different things, including the work of this company, but also the work of other local artists, happens. And we wanted to do a season, but the space wasn't done. And so we started asking ourselves, well, what kinds of things could we do to give people theatrical experience in the absence of a finished space? And the headphone walking play presented itself as a really exciting idea and opportunity. There are lots of headphone walking arts out there, but we had not encountered very many, really a very tiny number, that actually tried to take on the shape of a play. And so that was the kind of goal or ambition with Storm Country, and why I needed Aisha, because I'm not a playwright. So the thing I could say that's before and behind, again, the practical dimension of wanting to do something without having the architecture to be in a room together, is that Sam likes to joke that as someone who has written poetry and studied poetry closely alongside drama and performance in graduate school, I am driven by sound more than sense and read far too much Gertrude Stein. So we're always hearing things really differently in our household. And I'm always more tuned to consonances and resonances than to the cognitive connections that might be made between words. So that.
Yeah, that definitely. Jeremy and Caroline, do you have thoughts about things specifically that brought you into this work? I mean, I know you've both been doing it for quite a while in different ways.
I've just been thinking as we're talking about how important it was for me as a small child to be read to, and how that was one of the most comforting, pleasurable, joyful experiences of my childhood. And my mother still tells stories about how I would come with more books and say, please read, please read. And when I was a graduate student at the University of London, I had this experience of feeling a little like I was regressing, because I would listen to BBC Radio 4, which was all kinds of different news programs and also fiction and interviews. And I wouldn't be able to pull myself away. I would find it impossible to stop listening. And so I had to try to figure out how to get work done while having these radio voices that felt like they were these intimate, caring, like I felt like I was being taken care of in a way. And so there's something about sound without image, or sound that comes where you just feel like it's the ear, that I think has a special kind of pleasure. And I'm trying to put my finger on it, and I'm unable to, but I know it goes really deep back in my past.
I love that about the being read to as a kid. Yeah, absolutely. We could probably talk more about that too. Jeremy, do you have?
My answer would be quite similar. I come from a small town that's sort of like the inverse image of Ithaca. So instead of Cornell, it was a big chemical company, and but we had an amazing radio station, not in our town, but about a half hour away, which played, old radio drama, but also had a free jazz show, had an African pop show, and was, it really bound us together as listeners. So that kind of collective and communal listening, we used to tape programs and listen to them again. So there, the cultures of listening was something that I had from a very early age, and then later became a musician and did quite a bit of recording of my own, and sort of learning the technical aspects of it, I think, is something that has also been something that I is part of my interest today, both teaching and writing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, maybe, and this leads into the next question really, which is like, what is some writing for the ears that you love or that you found particularly formative? But I'm sort of struck as everyone's talking by the fact that we sort of like, oh, what brought me here? Oh, it was this thing that I, used to listen to, or the thing that I, and I was thinking about in my answer to these questions this morning, and a couple of favorites of mine were The War of the Worlds. I listened to that recording like 1,000 times. I can still hear the intonation of the actors' voices and the music, and I loved it. I would just listen to that over and over again. And like you, Carolyn, when I was little, I loved being read to, and my grandfather wrote a collection of stories when I was very young, and he lived in England, and he died when I was quite young, but he wrote these stories for me when I was a tiny kid, and my dad recorded them all on tape. And I can remember sitting with my sister huddled in the living room with the tape player, and sort of like, and my dad's like just in the next room. He could have read the stories, but no, we put the tape in and we click play and we listen to them. So sort of those sort of, as you say, Jeremy, that idea of sort of a shared communal experience, is something about that that was really formative for me. So people's highlights, maybe Jeremy, for you, it's Fireside Theatre. Is that one of your all-time favorites?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's I had an uncle who gave me a book, gave me a couple of the records when I was probably too young, but I really grew up with them. So it's that's super important. I would also say, I mean, this was on our radio station, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was the first, it was originally a radio program. It was the first BBC fiction program in stereo. It sounds amazing. It's got the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, or like legendary innovators, and Glenn Gould's radio documentaries later. And I guess I would say, also formative for me was late 80s and early 90s sample-based hip hop, which often had sort of diegetic skits in between the songs. That was another really inspiring thing. They often sample the Firesign Theater as well, I might add.
Oh, do they? Yeah. Funny. Yeah, Hitchhikers is excellent for sure. Any other favorites that anybody has?
I'd like to make a shout out for Janet Cardiff, the Canadian conceptual artist who does audio walks and sound installations, who is really amazing. And a number of the works that she's done, you can grasp versions of online. And probably in the United States, she's best known for a piece called Her Long Black Hair, which was written for a walk in and around Central Park. It's exquisite. So everybody download the PDF and listen to it. It's great.
Any other favorites before we move on? Is the list just too long? Too many? Well, then maybe a good thing to think about then would be to think about, given these sorts of things, these influences, and the fact that sometimes the writing for the ears is coming at this sort of junction between writing for ears and thinking about other kinds of writing that we've done, or other areas, medias maybe that we're writing for. What is it that specifically, what are you writing for when you are writing for the ears? So when that's your specific goal, what is the thing that you're writing for? Nick, you framed this question when we were talking about it the other day, and you were saying, like, what is it in the sensorium, right? What is it that what other things, what are the other considerations that you're thinking about as you're working with this material? So maybe I'll bounce that question to you first, Nick. Like, what else were you thinking about when you were writing Storm Country in those ways?
Well, I guess I have two provisional answers to that question. The first is that one is writing for the actor's voice in a different way. So I have a production and a reception answer to this question. We're not bound to the usual ways of thinking about casting when we're getting a group of actors into a studio to record their voicings for the thing that will then be an ambulatory experience for the listeners. So we could get our wonderful colleague, Kathleen Mulligan, who is in her 60s, to play a teenager and do a kind of wonderfully girlish thing with her voice. Now, we might want her to do that on stage in a, non-conventional, non-realist casting of a certain kind of play, but immediately and ipso facto, we could be innovative and playful and enjoy the possibilities of untethering actors' voices from our sense of looking at them as embodied people on stage. And then for the walk part of it, I mean, you're not writing just for the ear, but you're writing for the foot or the wheel, depending upon how people are moving through the experience. And so it requires really dexterous calibrations. You want people who are moving at what we take to be the common pace, as well as people who will be moving more slowly and people who will be moving more quickly, to have a similar kind of experience. And Aisha, you know this, and Katie, you know this too. That meant sometimes insanely micro level edits to the text as we did our test walks, because if you don't shave 2 seconds here, it's all going to be screwed up. And that, I think, is probably the biggest writing challenge at the level of revising and editing I've ever experienced. If I'm producing an essay for the page or a book for the page, I can be as florid as I like, and sometimes I do like to be florid, and that's just not an option with a walking play.
Yeah, I remember all of those walks. I remember one of them in the rain, and we were walking quickly because it was raining, and then we sort of messed ourselves up with that. And Katie, I don't remember how many times we walked up to the tennis court and we're like, okay, where are we? How long did it take to get here? How long do we have? So, but Katie, I kind of want to check in with you on this one too, because you said something earlier about thinking about the embodied space, like thinking about space and bodies in spaces, and what is it about the environment specifically that you are writing for when you're, I mean, we talked a lot about that, right? About the birds. We wanted to kind of like think about what things were happening in the environment. So can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, that's so interesting to think about and return to. And so for people who don't know where we were in Stuart Park, and this whole the play takes place in Stuart Park. So we were just constantly walking back and forth on the trail in Stuart Park. And so, yeah, I think as we were composing, being attuned to the small sounds in the environment, and the ways that might also unlock possibility for story. I feel like, and this might be shifting a little bit, but I find a lot of inspiration just in sound. Like a little overheard thing that somebody says sometimes will unlock so many ideas for story or things that I'm interested in. And so when we were in Stuart Park, yeah, imagining people walking the space the way that they might experience some synchronicity at the sound of a particular bird or a biker going by, or the sound. I remember you really thinking about the sounds of the tennis ball going back and forth, people playing tennis, for example, and the opportunities then that you have when you're telling story, not so much in a static space, but in a place where people are moving, where people are talking, where all kinds of things are happening around, and it becomes both inspiration for the story, but also a part of that experience of a reader or a listener who's experiencing that. And I think otherwise, yeah, kind of building off of what Nick said, it's a lot harder to sit for long passages of exposition, right? So we're thinking in general more about the sensory experience, the kind of images that a listener can kind of hold onto, and then carry with them as they move from scene to scene. So especially with something like anything that's threaded, whether it is a podcast or whether it's a walking play, when you're dealing with these multiple threads, it feels really important to compose it in a way that people can, that's really aware of your listener's attention, and to be thoughtful about that, since they're being generous with giving us their attention.
Can I say that one great thing about Missing Chapter that my students loved was that you referred to a piece of graffiti along the walk, and they were just completely amazed, as was I. And that seems like such a great example of what you were just describing.
I remember the day we found that when we were walking and we saw it. It was on a little box somewhere. I can't even remember the details of it now, but we were both really struck by that. We're like, oh, people will see this, right? People will see this as they're listening. And it's almost like you're spying on somebody, you know, there's almost that sort of weird thing. But I think in some ways it's a little different when you're writing for podcasts, right? I mean, Jeremy and Caroline, you would probably know more on this than I would, but I would imagine that the sorts of sensory considerations you have are quite different when you don't know what the environment is that your listener is going to be experiencing it in. So what sorts of things do you think about in terms of the sensory realm? Caroline, do you have a thought?
Sure. I was thinking that Jeremy was going to speak, but I think little pieces of what people are saying are helping me to frame an answer, which is to say, I don't know what attention people can give. I can imagine somebody driving or somebody cooking or somebody half listening or folding the laundry, right? Those are the kinds of activities that people do often while listening to podcasts. And for me, I think the hardest part is maybe similar to what Katie's talking about, trying to make sure you can hear even when you're surrounded by other kinds of stimuli, right? What can get through? And I think if I have any skill at all, it's the skill of taking complicated
ideas and making them digestible to a broad audience. And so for me, that was such a pleasure, but also such a challenge to take research done by scholars across disciplines at Cornell and to say, how can we put this in a little package, a 3-minute package, that also people who are only giving us 80% of their attention or 76% of their attention can still take in, can still get something from. And, I don't know whether we succeeded, but I do think that that was kind of the ultimate challenge for me, was to try to imagine getting really complicated ideas across in a short time and with limited kinds of attention and through the ears. If you're reading through the eyes, you can go back over it and stop when your mind is wandering. But with hearing, it's frequently your mind has wandered and you can't even find your place again, right? Or maybe you don't bother to find your place again. So I feel like it's the most challenging kind of writing that way.
Jeremy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've really only done one podcast, and I had the pros at KCRW who worked through the script with me. I learned a bit from example, but the thing that was especially interesting and is, I think, a bit of a challenge for me is that the thing about the Firesign Theater records is that they're super, super dense. And so in a way, it's really the opposite of, or at least it's a different phenomenon from a podcast, because, and I'm realizing this in my teaching, that on the one hand, one of the challenges with teaching that in my classes is that, just talking about comedy is hard, because it seems like it's not something that one takes seriously. But on the other hand, listening to something that you really are going to have to listen to several times, maybe to understand that there's a plot, is it something that I'm still thinking about in terms in terms of its meaning, because so much of our listening now is a form of multitasking. And it seems that, the headphone plays are a wonderful exception to that. Like you have to make sure probably that you don't get hit by a car, but otherwise you're immersed in the experience. But that really is a rarity compared to compared to our other experience of audio.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that so much, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about when I'm listening to things, it's usually when I'm driving, or Caroline, as you say, like folding the laundry or something, maybe you have something on, but that changes, I think, a lot, the relationship between the writing and sort of thinking about the sensory world, because other senses are going to maybe be looming larger in the experience of your listener than just what they can take in through hearing alone, which kind of really does kind of like make me think a bit more about this question of challenges and payoffs, right? Because I mean, the challenges are, how do you get the timing right if you're writing a headphone walking play? How do you unpack really dense material so that people can follow that if they don't have the benefit of being able to look back over the page? So maybe sort of thinking a little bit about challenges and payoffs. And Jeremy, I hope it's okay for me to share this, but you had that wonderful exercise from Macbeth that you do with your students.
Oh, yeah.
Which I just love. It's just like this fantastic exercise. And I'm going to ask you to say a few things about it. But one of the things that I think that I really responded to when I was looking at the work that you had done with that was the way that, when we're teaching students to write, thinking about listening, not just looking, that we're teaching them to think about all kinds of other considerations about storytelling, right? So like, even if the material is not dense, there are things that you have to be able to convey in order for the story to work. And particularly when you're working with just dialogue, that you've got to be so mindful about how you put those pieces into play, because otherwise you can't follow the story, right? You can't differentiate the characters. You don't know, like, put that down. You don't know what they've picked up, right? So Can you talk a little bit about what you found with working with that exercise with your students?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I do to try to get us in to develop a language to talk about these things. And when I've begun that class, like the first two things we do is we listen to a short track by the Last Poets, who are sort of proto hip hop group, and they have a track called "On the Subway," which you should check out, which is diegetic, like it places you in a subway car, and the voices are all sort of describing the space. And the other thing that we listened to in the first week is a play called "The Revenge" by Andrew Sachs, who hilariously is Manuel from Faulty Towers, but he does a play which is totally nonverbal, and it's a little bit corny, but it really brings students into all of the elements of dramaturgy that are not language based. And the thing that Aoise is describing is that by the end of the semester, I asked the students to record 10 minutes of some kind of drama on their own, and increasingly they've been doing their own adaptation writing, which has been amazing. But the thing Aoise is referring to is a book from the 30s, of which there are many, about radio production, which is not only a script, in this case it's an adaptation of Macbeth for local production, but it has all of the notes for performing the text, but also for mixing in ambient sound, and it's super helpful. And it's exactly as Aoise described. It gives you a roadmap to work with. But I have to say that some of my wonderful students in the fall were doing their own Foley work, and they were crumpling paper chip potato chip bags for walking through the leaves and all kinds of things, and it was really, really wonderful to see.
I love all those old kind of radio sound effect tricks. They're such a hoot to work with. I did a similar thing with some fifth graders up at the elementary school, and I was like, okay, and they just loved it, shaking things to make thunder and banging things about. And there was not a lot of dialogue. There was a lot of sound effects in those plays, which is kind of interesting. But and Caroline, so you're just going back to your question about the challenges. Like, are there other things that you are really mindful of when you're thinking about this question of like keeping the attention, or trying to make sure that you're mindful of like what things have to be underscored? How do you kind of weigh those considerations when you're thinking about the multitasking aspect of the reader or the listener?
Well, and especially with nonfiction and scholarship, there's a real question about how much can a person hear, right? How much can go in? And all of the people who are writing these were not actors, they were scholars, right? And not necessarily super practiced at the work of speaking publicly or of writing at this level. You can't be too detailed, but you also can't be too abstract. And so, and of course, what we found, I don't think anybody in this Zoom room will be surprised, but one of the things that we found is that storytelling, having a narrative arc is one of the ways in which people can follow a complicated argument, right? And so being able to say, this is where we started and this is where we ended up, or, and I actually started recommending to graduate students that when they go on the job market and they have an interview for an academic job, that they tell the story of their argument as opposed to trying to summarize it, because I think it's easier to follow. So that's one of the things I learned from writing for the ears, is that, abstract arguments, if I start to tell you the argument of the book I'm writing, I bet you everybody in the Zoom room's eyes could glaze over really, really fast. But if I say to you, I saw this, and then that made me wonder about that, and then, so narrative is I think one of the better tools for keeping our attention on the development of an argument. It doesn't work for all arguments. But the other thing that works, that I was really surprised by, a friend of mine who's a literary critic actually pointed this out to me. She said most podcasts are really exercises in ekphrasis, that is the translation of visual objects into words. She said you'd be surprised at how many podcasts focus on things you can't see, and they try to bring them to life for you. And I was like, well, that's odd, right? You would think that if you have the advantage of sound, why are you talking about what you can't hear, what you can see? But there's a delight, I think, in trying to bring visual objects or experiences to light, that to the ear or to the brain via the ear. That's a sort of challenge that I think some of the writers who wrote for our podcast actually took up really well. Try to picture this or envision that, right? And to get the audience kind of with them in an imaginative space.
Yeah, I know, Katie, I know that was something that you were really invested in when we were working together, that that sort of like, how do you describe this so that people can see it in their mind's eye without actually being able to see it? That was both a challenge and a pleasure.
Yeah, that was really interesting to think about, and hearing Caroline speak a little bit makes me think about the unique challenge with the missing chapter, where we had silent films, which had once been, you had the picture and not the sound, and then we flipped it and you have the sound, and are asking people to imagine, what the silent film would have looked like, what the stars would have looked like, and that was really fun. I guess another thing that I'm thinking about in terms of challenges and opportunities is thinking a little bit about voice and tone, right? Like the way that when you're listening, voice and tone can either really bring people in and really make them want to keep listening. And of course, that's true when we're looking at the words on the page too, but I think even more, of course, with audio, where a person might listen for just a little bit of time and quickly make up their mind as to whether they're going to stay with it or not. So voice and tone feels really important. And also, of course, as some others were saying, thinking about pacing. And I'm imagining a couple of my students are working on video essays right now. And that tricky balance of trying to get that right voice, that right tone, the right rhythm of the speech where it's not too fast and it's not awkwardly slow is a really interesting and demanding kind of creative challenge. And when you get it right, it's such a beautiful thing. And it can be very, very painstaking, the editing process, trying to get to that point where it feels right. And of course, that associative sense of like when you hit it and when it's right, it's so great when you do get it. But
yeah, Nick, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I'm really loving everything that our co-panelists are saying, and what you just described, Katie, makes me think about how grateful I am to and want to give a shout out to Aoise and my dear friend and colleague at Cornell, Carolyn Gelzer, who voiced the guide in Storm Country. She has a really rich, deep voice and can do all kinds of things with it. And I was talking to her partner, Judy, after she recorded the Storm Country vocals, and they ended up having a kind of running joke in their house that she was doing a kind of non-sexual seduction. And like, maybe next I should say, take off your clothes and walk into the lake, but before you do, give me all your jewelry. And it's totally true, that you can do things with your voice that draw people in and make them want to go with you, but you could also do things that really make them want to shut you out. And of course, the difference between the eye and the ear is that you can only close one of them.
Yeah, that idea of seduction is a really good way to think about that, Nick. I know exactly what you mean. And yeah, Carolyn was just definitely able to sort of like, kind of like, you think, oh, I trust this person to take me where I need to go. We've got about 10, 15 minutes left. So I wonder if we should check in with Robin and see if she has questions for us in the chat. I have one other thing I thought we could talk about, but I'd love to see if there's things in the chat that people would like us to address.
Yes, put your questions in the chat. Right now, Jeremy has told Anna that was your potato chip bag, but I don't see any. I don't see any questions.
It's a famous potato chip bag.
Well, we know what it means.
To post questions if they have them. I guess one thing I could ask is what people are listening to now. What have you been listening to recently? And I know that, Nick and I talked a little bit about this and we chatted the other day too, that, it's been such a strange last year and a bit, and we've sort of often, I think, been glued to our listening devices in various ways and for various reasons, and also kind of isolated from doing the usual sorts of things that we might do, like for me, go to the theatre. So what, is there anything, just a quick popcorn of things that anyone's been listening to that are really, what are they listening to now? What's been useful?
Well, we do have a question as people. What's funny is that I actually just found my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy cassettes in my attic, and I still have a little, what's it called? A little cassette player, Walkman. I still have a Walkman. But
awesome.
I had a fear people would make fun of me if they saw me with it.
None of the people on this panel would make fun of you. Those points are street cred points right there.
So Esther had a question. What are some suggestions about how to bring music into your story? She listens to This American Life and marvel at how they do it.
So I'd like to take that. Jeremy, do you want to take that one? You seem like a good person for that. Do you think about the role of music?
I do. I think I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask for advice, but I think that you want to ask if you want the music to collaborate with what you're reading, or if you want it to provide a kind of counterpoint. And I think that there's there's multiple ways of thinking about how that might work. I'm wondering what the other panelists think about that question.
Yes, I'm seeing Mary Lorson up above, and I'm thinking about some of the work that Mary did with her storytelling and music. But it just generally makes me think a little bit about how music, like visual elements, can really help to bring in emotion. They can really change things up in terms of creating space for a reader to feel and experience, to kind of be able to shift away from our voice for a second and integrate, right? And it can also really help to, I remember it was an essential part, especially as we were moving from place to place with the walking plays. But I think making it feel whole, making it not so much feel, in these formats like just a soundtrack, but something that's really integrated, that's expressive, whether it is adding tension or whether it's, kind of deepening what it is that we're speaking about. That music does play such an important part in it, but I don't know exactly that I can give a lot of tips for how people do that in terms of software or simple kinds of things that people might try. But having musicians, collaborating with musicians, I would say we have so many excellent musicians in our midst. And as writers and within these forms, I think that's one of the beautiful things, is collaboration with musicians, with other writers, being part of a team. So much writing often happens in isolation. And so to be able to say, like, hey, I'm interested in this idea. What do you think about collaborating and putting, you bring your musical skill, you bring your directing skill, you bring your writing, and the really cool ways. And then the reader collaborates too, the listener, by bringing their imagination and attention. It's a really beautiful and holistic kind of thing.
Yeah, it's topography, isn't it, really? It's sort of the topography of the experience. Music is so good for charting that in a way. Yeah, I remember we did use it in Mystic Chapter. We had people singing, but also in Storm Country, Nick. Remember we had that lovely choral piece that when you were walking along, one section would play. And I remember the first time I heard that and thinking how beautiful it was. I was like, oh, this is really nice that we get to have this. Robin, were there other questions?
No, some people have, Anna suggested she likes to listen to Between the Ears. It's from BBC Three. Mm-hmm. A great headphones listening experience, nonfiction choice, and also a new show called Soft Voice, which is fiction. So I think Lizzie would like to hear more general recommendations from any attendees who want to share. I've been paying more attention when I listen to podcasts with music or television, just about how the music is going to tell me what's going to happen in the narrative. The music is foreshadowing. You can always tell by the music, something bad's about to happen. And I usually, that was unconscious. I never really listened to it or paid attention to it. And now I'm paying a lot of attention to how those two are working together. I also really liked when you guys were talking about the first thing you heard when you were little. I was actually thinking for not only for Spring Rites next year, but for the art trail, of people to tell us the earliest thing that they remember that put them on their path to an artist. And it's just, I'm always fascinated by the path that artists take and how long ago they knew they were going to be an artist. So Jeremy likes Ear Hustle. That's fun, Ear Hustle. Appearances, Adventures in New America, The World According to Sound. Nick likes Talking Television in a Time of Crisis, a podcast sponsored by the Society for Cinema and Media Studies. There's so much out there that we can that we don't know about.
What's that one on NPR that has that? It's storytelling with a beat. What's that one? Has anybody been listening to that? Do you know the one I mean, Caroline?
Oh, Snap Judgment.
Which one?
Snap Judgment.
Snap Judgment. As I say, I listen to things when I'm driving my kids around to their various activities. So it's great when they're out to the horse barn because I get a good 15, 20 minutes to hear something. Jeremy and I sometimes cross paths up there. But that one, that has some really lovely things about it. I've enjoyed a couple of the stories that I've heard on that. And one of the things I've really noticed about it is the way that juxtaposition works to create the sort of the tension in the storytelling, that it's sort of like it's a little bit of this, then you get a verbatim this, and then you get some sort of speculation in the question, and sound is important too, and music, but it's the sort of, it's not just one person telling the story. Often it's like a sort of a composite in some ways, and juxtaposition feels really important. But I've enjoyed what I've heard of that. That might be a good one.
So, the next event is at 7:10, but we really can just keep chatting until we get there. There's really no prep that I have to do before the next event. For those of you who are sticking around, it is a group reading, fiction and creative nonfiction, with Mary Lorson, who's on the call, Dan Kopkow, David Gaspari, Brenna Fitzgerald, and Lizzie Frank. So yeah, keep chatting. There's keep track of the chat. There's more suggestions coming in, and you can cut and paste the chat, by the way. You can just, if you want to remember all this, because there's a lot of information coming into it. Wow, look at all of these.
I wanted to second what John Miller says, which is that it can be really excruciating to hear scripted banter that does not feel authentic. And I've been noticing this on television. I don't know, Nick, if you've been, I've been really bugged in recent years by the way dialogue is so unpersuasive to me. It does not feel like anything realistic. And is that a change? Like, did people used to write dialogue better? Am I just becoming a curmudgeon?
Probably all curmudgeons because we've been spoiled by the really good television that's out there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of debate in television studies about sound in its history, but many writers of scripted material for television and less scripted material for television had as a default assumption in the 20th century that people would be, sitting on the couch one minute and then going into the kitchen to do the dishes or get a snack the next. And so much of the dialogue in particular is routed through the expectation that it and other elements of the soundtrack have to convey meaning much more primarily than image.
Yeah.
And then that all changes. But of course, there's the vestigial stuff that carries over. And I suspect that we might be seeing a weird return to an earlier version of television writing precisely because of the complicated and stressful conditions induced by the pandemic. If you're home all the time, maybe you're not going to sit and watch whatever the new Breaking Bad is with utmost attention and need something more like the Connors, right? So
that question about the dialogue, the scripture back, because I agree with Jonathan Miller's point too. And I feel like, when I'm talking to my playwriting students about it, the phrase that I often use for them is, your hands and feet are showing, right? This idea that as a sort of puppeteer, the goal is for us just to see the puppet and to believe the puppet. But if you can see the hands of the puppeteer across the top of the curtain pulling the strings, then we know the banter is scripted and not banter. So I feel like, you develop an ear for that, to hear that. And I think it's different when it's accompanied by something visual that you're watching, right? But when all you have is the dialogue, it's probably worse.
What's an example of hands and feet?
So it's any time where you would hear somebody saying something like, it's usually, what it usually is it's exposition. It's usually just like tinny exposition. But I remember going to see one of the Star Wars movies in Berkeley. And to be clear, I am a Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars, but I went to see one of the sort of more recent ones when I was in Berkeley. And there was this long expository setup at the beginning of like, well, hello, I'm just back from the war that I fought 4 years ago in the Delta Quadrant with my friend who also was at the war fighting in the Delta Quadrant. I'm like, your hands and feet are showing, right? So it's any time where you feel the presence of the writer. And I think that's the issue with scripted banter, right? Is it's that you can feel the presence of the writer putting the words on the page. So yeah, it really bugs me. And I remember laughing out loud at the movie and getting like an elbow in the ribs to be quiet because I shouldn't be laughing at the exposition.
So let's see if there are any more questions and wrap this up, and it'll give people a minute to get a new cup of whatever they're drinking. So thank you, everyone. This panel was lovely, and you were our inaugural event for the Spring Rights Literary Festival.